Thank you. Good evening, councillors, members of the gallery and our viewers watching the live stream of tonight's meeting. My name is Councillor Lena Messina and I'm the Mayor of Darebin City Council, and I'll be the chairperson of tonight's planning meeting. And I can hear myself echoing in the background. Thank you. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's meeting, and I declare the meeting open at 6:32 p.m. Darebin City Council acknowledges the Wurundjeri people as the traditional owners and custodians of the land and waters we now call Darebin, and pays our respect to their elders past, present and emerging. Council pays respect to all other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities in Darebin. Council recognises and pays tribute to the diverse culture, resilience and heritage of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We acknowledge the leadership of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and their right to self-determination in the spirit of mutual understanding and respect. The health and safety and wellbeing of our community has and will always be paramount consideration of this council. Council continues to be guided by the government directives and wants to be able to do the right thing with the health of our community during the COVID-19 pandemic. This meeting will be open to the public and will be in line with the current health restrictions. This meeting is being live streamed via the link on the council website, so the council will be able to view the proceedings. So members of the public will be able to view the proceedings of the meeting. The meeting is also being recorded and will be made practical on the council website as soon as practical after the meeting. Council is both a workplace and a public space, and we have an obligation to ensure that the working environment and public forums are safe for everyone, both emotionally as well as physically. Before we commence tonight, I'd like to introduce councillors in attendance. We have Councillor Trent McCarthy, the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Tom Hannon, Councillor Emily Demetriadis, Councillor Gaetano Greco, Councillor Susan Rennie and Councillor Tim Lawrence. I would like to acknowledge we have apologies from Councillor Williams and also Councillor Newton. I'd like to introduce officers in attendance this evening. We have Rachel Olivier, who is General Manager of City Sustainability and Strategy, Catherine Pound, who's the Manager of City Development, Chad Griffiths is the Manager of City Futures, Matthew Cullen, oh, there you are, sorry, Coordinator Statutory Planning, Beth Lamb, who's a Senior Statutory Planner, and Hamish Jacobson, who is Senior Strategic Planner. Let's get underway. Item number 3, disclosures of conflict of interest. Are there any conflict of interest to disclose, councillors and officers? None noted. Item number 4, can I please have a confirmation of minutes of previous meeting and have a motion for the 12th of September 2022. Councillors? Moved by Councillor Hannon, seconded by Councillor McCarthy. All those in favour? Thank you, that's been passed unanimously. Item number 5, the consideration of reports. The first item that we have to consider this evening is the amendment on C2023 DARE Heidelberg Road Heritage Consideration of Panel Report and Adoption. Over to the officers.
Thank you, Mayor. Amendment C203 to the Darabin Planning Scheme proposes to apply the heritage overlay to 7 individual places of heritage significance along the Heidelberg Road corridor. While differing in levels of significance, some of the property is recommended for protection date from the earliest periods of metropolitan expansion, following the development of Heidelberg Road and the Fulham Grange estate, which was subdivided in 1883. This amendment was exhibited from the 11th of November to 13th of December. 4 submissions were received, 2 in support and 2 with concerns. Council considered submissions at its meeting of the Planning Committee on the 11th of April, where it resolved to refer submissions to an independent planning panel. That panel was held on the 20th of July and it released its report in August. Other than Council, no other parties made a submission to the panel. And the panel has found that the HO does not prohibit future development but requires a planning permit where heritage significance can be considered as part of future decisions. The panel found that net community benefit and the wider context needs to be considered in determining fairness when applying protections for heritage places. And it also found that property values and financial implications are not relevant considerations when assessing the heritage significance of a property. In essence, the panel has concluded that the amendment is strategically justified and that the Heidelberg Road Heritage Assessment is a rigorous, comprehensive and consistent with the relevant planning practice note. The panel has recommended that the amendment be adopted as exhibited, subject to some minor changes that Council has previously supported. Accordingly, it is recommended that Council adopt the amendment with the minor changes recommended by the panel.
Thank you, Chad. Councillors, are there any questions to the officers in relation to this particular item? No? Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Hannan.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move the recommended officer's motion.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Second by Councillor Rennie. Councillor Hannan. Thank you, councillors. Would you like to speak?
Yes. Thank you, Mayor. As we know, it's a requirement of Council under the Local Government Act that we preserve heritage for current and future generations. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yep, now, yep.
Yeah, thanks. Heritage is an important part of the fabric of Darebin. It tells part of our unique story and reflects our identity of who we are and what makes Darebin such a great place to live. I'd like to really thank the staff for many months of work that have gone into, firstly, bringing this to Council in the first place. This has come to Council a number of times, and this is, I guess, the final stage on a process that we've embarked upon. Staff have engaged their expert advice to inform these decisions, consulted with the community, as we've heard, coordinated with the planning panel process, and then to produce this comprehensive report and recommendations for us to consider. And look, I appreciate that by preserving heritage, this places limitations on what future developments will be possible. But as we've heard, it's important to note that it doesn't prevent any development at all. It just ensures that any changes needs to complement the heritage value of the properties. And there are some really obvious candidates for heritage protection in this recommendation, which I think would be widely supported. Some of our old historic commercial properties on Heidelberg Road, we've got the church there on Heidelberg Road, which, are important parts of our history. So I believe this recommendation strikes the right balance between preserving, keeping intact what's important, but allowing scope for future development. And on that basis, I endorse it for the Council's consideration.
Thank you, Councillor Hannan. As a seconder, would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor?
Yes, thank you. I learnt so much about heritage, in fact, from this process. I think we often say that we like things in our neighbourhoods, we don't want them destroyed, we want them preserved. We don't want to lose those things that we feel make our neighbourhood special. And that's easier said than done, because in fact, in order to get a heritage overlay applied, there is a very rigorous process, and that's what I wasn't as familiar with until we went through this process and looked at the way every single property in the precinct area was studied, was considered. Some of those were more recent, some were older. Age is not the only determining factor of heritage. And with every property having been studied and deeply considered and thought through in terms of what the heritage values are, a determination was made by experts that some properties did meet the threshold. And that then went to the planning panel, which looked at all of the evidence in front of them and really endorsed the finding that those properties did warrant protection and did have heritage value. And planning panel therefore makes a recommendation that this is strategically justified. And on that basis, I think it is incumbent upon us as councillors to protect the heritage that we have, and our community has told us so clearly that they value. So I commend this to everyone, and I think it's really pleasing to know that into the future, careful consideration will have to be given to heritage in any future planning applications.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Are there any further speakers? There are none. I'll put this item to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. That's been carried unanimously. The next item on the agenda, councillors, is item number 5.2, which is application for a planning permit D520 2021 102 Perry Street, Fairfield. Officers will be presenting to the committee. Welcome, team.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is a proposal to construct 3 double-storey dwellings on the lot at 102 Perry Street in Fairfield. Each dwelling features 3 bedrooms, ground floor secluded private open space and 2 on-site car parking spaces. The site is zoned General Residential Zone Schedule 1. The application was advertised and 8 objections were received on the key grounds of overdevelopment, car parking impacts, additional vehicle crossovers, impacts to street trees, orientation of the dwellings, setbacks and neighbourhood character. The proposal is generally compliant with the objectives and standards of Clause 55, so Res Code, of the Darebin planning scheme, subject to minor variations in relation to standard B8, which is site coverage, and B28, which is private open space. To that point, an officer motion to amend condition 1 of the planning of the notice of decision is proposed, and that's as a result of the applicant advising that they can comply with the 50% site coverage requirement, which is under the General Residential Zone Schedule 1. Accordingly, it's recommended that condition 1, which requires amended plans to be submitted to council, be updated to include a new part, so item 1T. If we can show this on the screen, perhaps. Yep, so that's just bolded there on screen. So compliance with standard B8 site coverage at the relevant clause of the scheme would be required with any approval granted. Overall, the proposal appropriately responds to preferred neighbourhood character of the precinct D4, and accordingly it's recommended to support the proposal and issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Are there any questions to the officers, councillors? There are no questions. I understand that there are 3 submitters in the gallery this evening. I'm going to invite you up one at a time based on the names that I've got in front of me, and then you have 3 minutes to submit and speak to the committee. The first person I have listed is the applicant, Kim Belfield. Oh, yeah. Please approach. And you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. When I rolled in, I got a bit of a thought that I'd probably be here until midnight because I looked at the agenda and went, holy cow. Thankfully, you got through that first one very quickly. Look, I won't labour the point here. The officers have given a very detailed assessment, both in terms of the statutory assessment, the broader policy assessment. What I would like to point out is this application was lodged back in August last year. It's gone through about 3 separate amendments, and those amendments have been essentially derived from lots of discussion with the council officers saying we will not support it, it doesn't comply with the urban design, preferred urban design, etc., etc. So it's been continually amended to get to the point where it is now before you. It is a good design. I think it was a good... I like the approach the council has adopted where it seeks to be collaborative and end up with a better design, and that's what's happened. This is a site which is well accessed to public transport. It's on what I call an ideal location. Lots that are on either northeast or northwest corners are probably the best sites you could possibly get for medium density because any overshadowing falls over the street. It doesn't fall over the next door neighbour's private open space. So it has that. It has the existing site is a house of not particularly great merits. It certainly wouldn't have got into your first part of the report tonight. It already has a double crossover and a single crossover, so what we're proposing is essentially not changing the numbers of crossovers, just relocating them, so that really hasn't changed. The built form seeks to present a very simple palette, so white on the bottom and then standing seam black metal over the top on the first floor and the roof, so it creates a very simple form. That form has been designed through significant effort to reflect the large-scale gable ends that you find prevalent in the area for Californian bungalows, so it's a contemporary interpretation of those design elements. Yes, we have reorientated the design to face Kennedy Street rather than Perry Street. That's intentional, in part because the development along Kennedy Street are a lot closer to the street than Perry Street, and this, by reorientating the design to Kennedy Street, we are maximising the utilisation of the site. And given that this is in an incremental change area, it's got good access to activity centres and transport, it's consistent with government policy to actually encourage intensification of development in that area. I'll stop at that point.
Thank you very much for your attendance and your submission, Kim. The next person I have is Marshall Toohey. Good evening, Marshall.
Good evening.
Welcome. You have 3 minutes to put in your submission.
What about 3 minutes 45? I've done some rehearsal. Good evening, councillors. My name is Marshall Toohey, and with my partner Kelly and son Donovan, I've lived at 103 Perry Street, Fairfield since 1994. You've received from us a detailed written objection to the proposed development at 102 Perry. I sincerely hope that you give appropriate weight to our objection as to the other objections from fellow residents in our immediate vicinity. Courtesy of accident and Google, I found the agenda for tonight's meeting just yesterday and noted the detailed summary and recommendation from council senior planners. I've read it and note that great effort has gone into ensuring that the proposal meets minimum building and planning standards. I'm not an expert in town planning, and I won't pretend to mount detailed arguments about schedules of construction materials, height of fences, minimum storage area and outdoor space. What I do know is that the proposal is inappropriate for many reasons, as outlined in our objection, but I'll focus on just a few here. They're important to us. Every day we observe heavy street parking in Perry Street and its offshoots, most notably Kennedy Street. Despite what you think might be adequate street parking, cars are parked on streets and nature strips in growing number. Yesterday at 5 p.m. on a Sunday, 3 cars were parked on nature strips, probably illegally, within 50 metres of our house. Residents want to protect themselves and their cars from traffic damage. The development proposal will manifestly increase the risk to public safety by increasing the number of cars parked on the street. Every day we observe cars in volume and speed driving along Perry Street, especially at peak times. Perry has become the new Grange as a result of increased development at Darebin, the new rail crossing and the Chandler widening. You as councillors have a responsibility to public safety. There are already huge risks on our immediate streets. This patchwork proposal, and I don't mean that to offend, as hungry as it is, on the corner of Perry and Kennedy, increases that risk. I especially fear for our elderly and the many young children who play on nature strips and walk along footpaths. I could speak about streetscape, amenity, the look, the imposition of neighbouring properties, the false impression the images in the planning documents give, you know, the happy smiling faces, the vacant lots, the smooth, cool buildings. You can judge. Simply, it isn't like that. Go for a walk at our hood to observe that.
10 seconds.
20 seconds?
20.
The decision is pretty simple. If you want to maximise properties, if you want to improve your council rent revenue and meet minimum planning guidelines, increase cars on the road, parked or speeding, you'll approve the application at the risk of public safety. If you see your role as custodians of public safety, traffic management, existing residents need, maintenance of streetscape and heritage.
Thank you.
You'll reject it out of hand.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
time.
Is Mark Casey in the gallery this evening? Good evening and welcome.
Whilst I hand out this single page to each of the councillors, I've got a request. Could I be seated whilst giving my presentation?
You can, yes.
Thank you.
Would you like to just give one, pass it on? Would you like us to do that? Thank you.
I was hoping to be head of table, but nonetheless. Hello, can people hear me?
Yeah, we won't start the clock yet. We'll
No?
start the clock.
No,
we
I'm
won't start
just-
the clock yet. Just wait for the gentleman to be ready where he needs to be first. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Currently, 102 Perry Street is part of an established streetscape with 4 other properties on Perry Street. Our home is 104 Perry Street, directly next door. The 5 properties are all oriented to face Perry Street and form a consistent streetscape. The proposed plans for the development of 102 Perry Street have been reoriented to face Kennedy Street and present as a deviation from the existing streetscape and character. Point 2, as owners of 104 Perry Street, we will be directly affected by the building and carport, specifically by the proximity of the carport to our southern boundary. In fact, the columns are on the boundary, and by the dwelling itself. Placed forward to Perry Street boundary. Based on Darebin planning scheme, site layout and building massing, the street setback objective for a corner site should be the same distance as the setback of the front wall of the existing building on the abutting allotment facing the front street, or 9 metres. The proposed setback does not conform with this standard B6. Third point, included in the proposed plan for 102 Perry Street, there is a parcel of land that would be allocated to Unit 3 is approximately 37 square metres of secluded private open space. This parcel of land is irregular. It is bounded by 3 other properties. This parcel of land, originally a laneway, now disused with no access outside of 102 Perry Street, would be part of the land area in calculating the area of open space to dwelling space. In the event of the proposal being developed, the future owner of Unit 3 would be able to sell the parcel of land to one of the surrounding properties. This titled land area of 102 Perry Street is 557 square metres, and if the laneway area is 37 metres, in effect, the proposal has 3 units on a land area of 520 square metres. I have a depiction to scale, I have a depiction to scale of 102 Perry Street. 557 square metres. Let's take away the laneway. We now have 520 square metres for 3 double-storey units, each of 3 bedrooms.
You'll have 20 seconds.
Okay, the crossover proposed on Perry Street for access to Unit 1 is directly next to the high amenity value large street asset tree with a tree protection radius of 7.8 metres. The construction of a crossover, given the proximity, will have a direct threat to its survival. Car parking is another issue. This is a precinct known as D4.
That's your time, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mark.
Thank you.
Councillors, do I have a motion?
Could I ask a question in view of what we've just heard?
You can, yes.
Yeah.
Councillor Greco,
Look, I'd like to ask a question through you, Mayor, to our officers. It was a question I was going to ask initially, but now it's actually been brought further to our attention by the objectors. Just in relation to Unit 3 and the secluded private open space area, I've never seen anything like that. And I was just wondering the appropriateness of that to be considered as private open space in view of that it is surrounded by 3 other properties rather than being an integral part, if you like, of Unit 3. So can I just hear from the officers in relation to that?
Thank you, Councillor Greco.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. In terms of the private open space there and where it's located, we'd note that that parcel is a portion of the land title that the application is seeking permission on, so it is a historic part of that title. It can be proposed to be used as private open space. And in terms of the layout, I guess while I would agree that it's not something you would see every day, it's a well-dimensioned portion of private open space for the metrics that we use. So it's approximately 3 metres wide off the top of my head, which meets sort of our minimum standards, so talking to minimum standards, but it contributes to a larger parcel of secluded private open space that the dwelling has access to. So it is surrounded by fencing, but I think that's the nature of the parcel of land itself. It's being utilised in a way that's most sensible for the development that we've actually got in front of us. In terms of any future resale or subdivision, those are all things that would require council approval and that would have to be considered with this proposal in mind and wouldn't, to be blunt, wouldn't be supported. Basically, a plan of a subdivision application would need to consider that parcel as part of the land for that development, as would any sort of amendment to the planning permit. It's not something that we would be able to support.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary question?
Supplementary?
Yeah.
Just in terms of whether that gullyway of that private open space, is there anything hindering, can the council in any way hinder or affect the sale of that land, that therefore it does not become private open space for Unit 3, but rather it gets absorbed by the neighbouring, one of the neighbouring properties? So is there anything that council can hinder that happening?
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mayor. No, I would have to say not. It's a parcel of privately held land on title for the landowner. Looking at the title for the land, it's been part of that parcel for quite some time, and I don't think it's council's place to sort of seek to have that portion of land reallocated or sold to another adjoining block. It is a parcel of land the owner owns.
And thank you, through you, Mayor. I'll just jump in and add to that question as well. The situation you've put forward, that what would stop that parcel of land being sold, the answer is it would require a subdivision permit, which council would have to grant. So if they wanted to sell that land, they would have to come back to council to seek approval. And as Matt said, we would be considering the impact of that sale, but we'd also be considering it in the context of this were to be approved. So that's the safety net that council has in this situation. That sale requires further approval from council.
Thank you. Councillor Greco, any further questions? Are there any other questions? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, just, Madam Senator, just wanted to see if there was an alternate motion. I was also seeking to get a copy, get that cardboard cutout from the presenter.
Sorry, first of all, there is an alternative motion that I understand has been circulated, and from my understanding, the author of that alternative motion had her hand up prior to yourself. Did you want the cardboard cut out now to ask a question?
I was going to request to have that and see that.
Okay, so councillors, I did have a motion. I asked, you have a question? Sorry, go ahead, councillor.
Sorry, I have a question. I believe I asked it earlier, but it wasn't answered. Now that we've seen the actual diagram, and if we do cut that particular parcel of land out, what effect does it have on the Unit 1 and 2 in terms of open space?
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mayor. The impact of the removal of that portion of land on Units 1 and 2, there would be no impact. It doesn't contribute to their open space for those 2 units. It would result in a non-compliance for the dwelling that it serves, though. So dwelling 3.
A whole compliance of the whole property?
If it were non-compliant, so if that section were removed, the entire development, as it's assessed against Res Code, would fall into non-compliance as a result of dwelling 3 losing that offshoot, if you like.
So can I ask a follow-up question? What percentage is the open space of Unit 1 and Unit 2 in terms of a whole? So Unit 1, how much open space does it have? Unit 2, how much open space does it have? And in comparison to Unit 3?
Thanks for the question. In terms of the percentages, I don't have them to hand. I do have the open space provision on the lot, which we heard earlier was...
And how does that differ to what the regulations are?
Can we let the officer finish the question, and then I'll ask you a supplementary question?
So in terms of the overall lot, which is 555 square metres, I think, off the top of my head, dwelling 1, in terms of the metrics that we use to assess private open space, has 78.3 square metres, dwelling 2, 63.1 square metres, and dwelling 3, so the dwelling in question, has 87.4 square metres. So again, while I don't have those percentages, the loss of that parcel, which I think we heard was about 30 odd square metres, would mean it's 50 square metres or so. So it's about 10% of the total site area.
And I just to jump in through you, Mayor, we've just also rechecked the garden area calculation, the minimum garden area calculation, if that land wasn't included, but it would still comply, we believe, with the minimum area for the garden requirements as well, even if you weren't including that land.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Dimitriadis, you have a supplementary question?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to ask, in terms of open space percentage for each unit, what is the actual requirement for each unit to have in terms of open space?
Sure. Thank you for the question. Through you, Mayor. So the planning scheme in terms of Res Code, Clause 55, doesn't set percentage requirements for private open space. It sets area requirements. So that scales based on the development really you're using or you're assessing, sorry. In this instance, we're in the General Residential Zone Schedule 1, which varies the requirement for open space. So it increases it in this case. The minimum requirement for each dwelling is 55 square metres, with a minimum dimension of 3.5 metres to the secluded private open space portion and a total provision of 40 square metres of secluded private open space. So that's an increased requirement than standard, which is complied with in this case.
As in complied with, each of the dwellings comply with that requirement?
Each dwelling complies with the total area provision. The exception to that is dwelling 3, which for a portion of the secluded private open space doesn't meet that 3.5 metre width. So it has the full quantum, just a portion of it isn't at the minimum dimension.
Thank you. Councillor Dimitriadis, do you have another question? Are there any further questions, councillors? So, Councillor Dimitriadis, was I correct that you have a motion?
Yes, Mayor, I have an alternate motion.
Thank you. I'm assuming it's the one that you circulated earlier?
Yep.
I'll wait for that to come onto the screen. Can I just confirm that this is your alternate?
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
Seconder? Yeah, I just made the assumption. Councillor Demetriadis, would you like to speak to your alternate motion?
Thank you. I'm raising this alternate motion that Council not support the planning application on the following grounds. Firstly, neighbourhood character. In particular, that the proposal does not respect the setback along Perry Street. As we can see in the plans and maps provided, the other properties in this street have a large setback. In particular, the adjacent property to this proposal has a setback of 9.6 metres, while this proposal only allows for a 3.7 metres of a setback, which alters the character of the whole street. Furthermore, this proposal has no secluded open space for Unit 1 and therefore requires a high front fence along Perry Street to provide privacy to Units 1 private open space, which therefore does not respond to keeping fences to a low, medium height or to be transparent as required by clause 21.034. What I'm also concerned about with this proposal is that it has excessive site coverage and therefore is an overdevelopment. If we look at the plans provided, there are only 2 other developments that I can see that have 3 units on the property in this neighbourhood. However, these 3 unit developments are on a much bigger block of land than this proposal of 102 Perry Street, and therefore they have greater open space and a larger setback than this application has provided with us today. I also want to note that the characterisation of this particular area in Fairfield has Zone 1 general residential zoning, which, as you know, requires high standards and respect for the neighbourhood character of the area. So we need to be cautious not to approve developments such as this present to us today, because it also creates a bad precedent for future developments to follow and for more developers to seek exemptions on the rules rather than to follow them.
Thank you, Councillor Demetriadis. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Messina, I wholeheartedly support the I wholeheartedly support the alternate motion put by Councillor Demetriadis, and I also like to congratulate the objector, Mark, for actually running through the real planning details of General Residential Zone 1, which happens to be our 3rd best protection in the city. Our first best protection is single dwelling covenants, which we know about in Oak Hill and Merrylands. Our next best is neighbourhood character, which we got very little from Matthew Guyon. And then we have precious few General Residential 1 zones as requested. So these are places where we can defend neighbourhood character. That goes to actually the standards that have been breached here in terms of the frontage setbacks on Perry Street. While the corner blocks are lucky, there is a recent development which is mentioned here in the submission, but I'd just like to point out that we're asked to put 3 units on this block, and the other modern development on the corner of Perry and Derby Street is a block that big. And that's why we're seeing so many breaches, but we're also seeing a poor response to neighbourhood character, both the frontage and the garden character of the area. It's completely intact. And if you look at this, as is mentioned by Councillor Demetriadis, there's 2 3-unit developments only in the area. The rest are now single or intact. The general pattern in Fairfield has actually been dual occupancies, and they've respected the streetscape. So I would commend
10 seconds.
Councillor Demetriadis' motion, and I'd also thank you for explaining us the square metres and how that all works.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers?
Mayor Messina, I'd like to make some observations, if I may.
Actually, can I go to Councillor Rennie because her hand was up first?
No, after you.
Thank you, Mayor. This is one I'm somewhat ambivalent about. And my ambivalence stems from the fact that it is possible that this could go to VCAT, and VCAT could look at it and say, yes, it should be oriented to Perry Street, which would be possible by taking the first 2 units and turning them sideways. And that would likely result in potentially a more problematic built form for neighbours, in that it could actually push the built form closer to the adjoining property to the north. 3 could still be achieved, because there's nothing in a parcel of land this size which is going to prohibit the building of 3 homes. And these are 3 Sizable homes, 3-bedroom family homes with good-sized rooms, with great amenity. And so if we insist on an orientation to Perry Street, I think it's just worth noting that that may result in unintended inconveniences and amenity impacts, which may not actually be favourable to what people are seeking. And I think that's just important to say and to know, should this go to VCAT. With respect to the unusual shape of the block of land, we did follow up on this, and we know that this that part of land has been part of this title since the 1940s. This is not a kind of late add-on to the land. And in thinking about the question of dimension and whether 3 metres is sufficient, I ask, if this was my private open space, could I use it? What could I do with it? And I look at this parcel of land and I think, what an amazing place for a strip-long vegetable strip, which you could be planted against the south wall and you would have magnificent vegetables in great sun. So
10 seconds.
Is this private open space, quality private open space? I would say yes, and it's delivered far in excess of what the actual requirement is.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Councillor Greco, I'm assuming you would like to speak to the alternate motion.
Thank you, Member Sina, if I may. Yeah, look, I just want to make some observations in relation to this application, and there's just 2 main things that I'd like to draw attention to. One is in relation to neighbourhood character. I believe that the issue of neighbourhood character is central to this particular application, and I note in the presentations that were made by the objectors that the reorientation to face Kennedy Street, which will present a deviation from the existing streetscape and character. I think that's a very important point to take into account, is that would just change fundamentally the neighbourhood character in terms of, because it changes the actual streetscape. Often when we look at neighbourhood character, we look at the dwelling in terms of its shape, its size, and the type of material that is to be used. But here it goes a step further in terms of a whole shifting of a corner block, particularly in a residential zone as that is, and I believe that will is a fundamental shift in terms of neighbourhood character. And then the second point that I raised during question time, I know that technically it is part of the title, that is that piece of secluded open space. So yes, technically it can be included as secluded open space, but in terms of what that means in reality, where you have basically 3 fences that encapsulate that area, I'm not sure whether that actually, in real terms, would amount to proper secluded open space.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? There are no further speakers. I'll now put that alternate motion to the vote. All those in favour? That is being supported by Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Demetriadis, Councillor Messina, Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Greco. All those against? That is Councillor Hannan and Councillor Rennie. The council has decided in favour of the alternate motion. The planning committee has decided not to support the application, issue a refusal to grant a planning permit on the grounds as listed in the alternate motion. The applicant and the objectors will be notified in writing. The applicant can appeal the decision of VCAT. The process of the appeal is subject to timeframes detailed in the documentation. Thank you. Thank you for your attendance this evening. Item number 6, other business. 6.1 is general planning information scheduled in VCAT applications. Do I have a motion, councillors? Councillor McCarthy.
Happy to move the recommendation, Mayor.
Seconded by Councillor Rennie. Councillor McCarthy, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, it's self-explanatory, Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Rennie. All those in favour? Thank you. That's been carried unanimously. Item number 7, consideration of reports considered confidential. There are no confidential business items to consider this evening. We'll now move on to the next item, which is item number 8, close of meeting. Councillors, there's no other business to consider this evening. I declare the committee meeting closed at 7:16 p.m. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your attendance. And can I have the live